Anyhow, another person or another woman who's very fascinating. If you really want to delve deeper into like corruption chronicles, there's a woman, the wonderful Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, reforming the unreformable, and she introduced some great policies during the time she was in a leadership position, a very high profile position in the World Bank, which she left because Obasanjo asked her to come and serve him during the first, in the First Republic, that first second term of the Fourth Republic, sorry. And she implemented, many different strategies to limit corruption. Obviously, oil is the core of it, and the reality, as far as she's concerned, the money cannot be stolen forever. And as the money is looted, and as time passes by where oil spillages, fields which could be used for agriculture but have not been cleared of petroleum and other environmental degradation, is basically left to fester, literally left to abound. It's a disastrous situation. So what she is basically, she's outlined, her experiences, and it's a good evaluation personally. So if you're interested in when people talk about corruption and strategies to remediate it and good economic and fiscal management, you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. She's definitely the most insightful when it comes to economics in Nigeria, in my opinion. I think anyone gets near her. She paid a dear price because she had her mum kidnapped. Fighting corruption is dangerous. She had her mum kidnapped, and it could have gone wrong. Luckily, her mum managed to escape. Again, that's the cost of, and because of her position on fuel subsidy, a group of Nigerian politicians led by Adams Oshiomhole and some others now concocted, I think it was also Rotimi Amici, they concocted a narrative against Goodluck Jonathan to basically whip up this frenzy to get people to vote him out. Because, Goodluck Jonathan's term was not, without any corruption between 2011 and 2015. It wasn't without corruption, but it was at a time, it was probably, his tenure was during a time probably the most successful period economically and probably stability wise in Nigeria's Fourth Republic, But like I said, agenda's agendaed, and it set the tone for where we find ourselves today. Please do read the book. A lot of people have made significant sacrifices in the context of the Nigeria project. Other books I would recommend, or actually, when I say recommend, depending on your taste buds for understanding corruption complexes, especially in Nigeria, there's The Moral Economies of Corruption by, I believe it is, Stephen Pearce. I read this book, when I was writing my first book some time ago, and very interesting. He talks about the history of what would be considered corruption. It weren't considered corruption at the time, but basically call it native administration, where gifts were given, essentially, as a form of payment in kind to induce certain deliveries and outcomes and what have you. Whether that's a case of bribing tax officials so that they will mark you down as having paid tax when you actually haven't. Let's say your tax bill's $5,000 for the year, but a tax agent says to you, "Oh boy, just give me 1K now, 1,000, and I will say that you paid. Okay, now no problem." So what will now happen is there's a $4,000 deficit, but what will now happen is they will now extort it from someone that out of principle refuses to pay the bribe. So they will now make that person make up. It's not funny. They now make that person to make up the amount that the person that didn't pay tax was supposed to. So he talks about that, for example. He talks about the cement armada. Nigeria's economic growth, if you will, whether that was the most in the sort of, either side of, I want to say Second Republic. So from 1973, right, Nigeria discovered oil a long while back, right? It discovered oil, I believe, in the 1910s in the area of the Beju Lekki, Epe, that kind of area. I think they saw some oil in Imo State in the 1930s. But in terms of vast commercial quantities, right, they discovered it, I believe, in 1955 in present-day Bayelsa State. And from there, obviously, the oil revenue started to, really kind of abound. Prior, cocoa was probably the largest source of revenue, but the oil started to basically supplant that, and that coincided with policies that weren't targeting non-oil driven economic growth, because the objective was never to govern in the first place anyway. Okay, so very, 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 very critical point in time. And 1973 was when you had the oil embargo, right? It was the Yom Kippur War. I think it was Israel, Palestine, blah, 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 blah. So October 1973. And then an oil embargo was announced, right? If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can look up on YouTube the Seven Sisters, which talks about Texaco, British, is it Anglo-Persian Petroleum, BP basically, and a host of other sort of like well-known oil companies. And yeah, very, very, very interesting. If you have got time and you're interested in that kind of stuff, Google it, Seven Sisters. So the Seven Sisters pretty much had exploitative relationships with various oil producing companies, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it was the list goes on. What now happened was, because of this Israel, Palestine, whatever, Saudi Arabia now announced an oil embargo against, if I recall correctly, the UK, the US, Japan, Germany, and the Netherlands, right? Officially, there were ways around it, but ostensibly, that was the oil embargo. The price of oil went from $3 to $12 overnight. That's a fourfold increase. Nigeria's oil went wham. So it was circumstances outside of Nigeria's control that led to this oil rush, which I think has really messed up the country from then. The country was already in a mess, don't get me wrong. Like, the building blocks for it to be what it is now were set in stone time ago. But let me tell you, game changer. Game changer. Once the oil came in, I'm also in a good way, terrible. Once the oil came in, everyone just, their brains scatter. Now, why I mentioned this book, right? I know I gave a bit of a long overview. The reason why I mentioned that book was because it talks about something that I found very almost unfortunate, tragic, and kind of almost amusing. I believe it was in the mid-70s. Nigeria had a requirement to purchase cement to build our infrastructure. Aside from stealing the money that came from oil, like, like the oil bonanza, they did want to do some infrastructural work. So they had delineated, outlined certain projects. Because they wanted to inflate the amount that it cost to buy the cement, each quantity of cement that was purchased, I think it was each pound of cement, rather than buying it at the usual, I believe it was $45 per quantity, they inflated it to $110. It's not funny. To $110 they inflated it to. And what that did was that they now were buying. They bought 20 times the amount that was needed in cement. But they bought so much cement that it was backed up at the ports. They had no space to store it, and it was affecting the imports and exports of the other goods, right? So they now had to take it to different ports around the world and pay daily demurrage rates of $4,000. Yeah, $4,000 in the mid-70s is not $4,000 today, so you can do the maths for yourself. Nor is the inflation from 45 to 110. Mad money that they inflated and managed to coax out from the Nigerian public funds. It gets worse. When Nigeria was able to find some purposes to put that cement to use with, the cement was discovered that it wasn't actually cement, it was sand. It's not funny. I think it was sand and some other rubbish, but it had no prospects. So all that money and all the suffering that they meted out on Nigerians was for what exactly? That episode became known as the Cement Armada. And from there, the international press, that was the first time that they had ever really reported Nigeria as a corrupt haven. What did that do? Loads of Europeans and other sort of like grifters and chancellors now rushed to Nigeria saying, can make that kind of money. That's me, right? But what they didn't realize was that there were various Nigerian youth that were anticipating that at least part of that money would go towards public services and improving their lives. Didn't happen. So many of them now ventured into all kinds of heinous things. Some extreme cases, people sacrifice and ritualistic sacrifice, but in many other cases, it was 419. That was really the onset of 419. You know, where people were like, I must hammer by fire by force. You understand? So it was the onset of 419. So a lot of these business people that came in trying to get like, you know, their own piece of the pie, they got scammed. And then that led to more reports of how Nigeria is this, Nigeria is that, da 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 da. People are very hypocritical. No one's denying that the neo-colony of Nigeria isn't corrupt, but you know, there's definitely been a hand in glove effort. You know, Britain been very consistent, unsurprisingly, very consistent in their part. And other entities have also done what they did. But listen, if you're interested in that type of thing, fantastic. He also talks about other forms of corruption that took place under, I believe it was the president of the Second Republic, Shehu Shagari, and his brother-in-law, Umaru Diko, who had stolen a lot of money in and around the election build-up and during that Second Republic. And so I believe when Shagari was supplanted in December 1983, Buhari, who came in January 84, now, because Diko had moved to London. He'd moved to London to escape any prosecution, make a life for himself. He's stealing and whatnot, right? And then Buhari got a Mossad agent, like an Israeli Secret Services agent, to kidnap him from his London home, and then put him on a cargo plane from Luton to Lagos. And they managed to kidnap him. They sedated him. They put him in the box. It was marked for export. I believe suspicion was raised at some point, and they done a routine check. I mean, a check that would be not out of the ordinary, and it was discovered at literally at the 11th hour, was when it was discovered. And yeah, that also made waves in the press as part of Nigeria folklore up till today. Anyhow, I've spoken a lot. There's that book. If you're interested in diplomatic perspectives, there's John Campbell, who has written extensively on Nigeria. Sorry, you probably noticed I've got a load of makeshift bookmarks. I've got so many books. I've got like 600, so go figure. Anyhow, very interesting book. You know, talks about Nigeria's precarious state as a, as an entity. There's also this one. And the reason why I'm mentioning both of them, because they kind of cover similar topic matter. So this one's just a bit more recent and a bit more informed, right? Nigeria and the nation state, rethinking diplomacy with the post-colonial world. So he speaks to the issues that kind of bedeviled Nigeria from his own perspective, having been an ambassador, and the futility of comparing Nigeria with America. Of course, American cultural colonialism, what it has done is it's influenced the minds of many people that, and as by design that it's influenced people to, how would I put this now? Probably lost my train of thought, forgive me. Where was I? Nigeria, nation state, John Campbell. Look, forget that. Very good book, very interesting book. If you want to learn more about, obviously Nigeria's issues, and like I said, the American kind of preoccupation in terms of trying to emulate American governance in Nigeria, right? And anticipating that eventually Nigeria will get it right, because America had its problems and some other nonsense. But the reality of America and the reality of Nigeria is completely different. The external perspective of Nigeria is very different to what you understand. A lot of people presuppose, I mean, probably not now that Nigeria has a drug lord as president, but prior to that, a lot of people presume that Nigeria is a bit more functional than it actually is. And so he disabuses people of that notion. Although he's definitely a one Nigerianist, and he thinks Nigerians are probably better off staying together, which I'm not sure I agree about. Yeah. Well, no comment. Last book that comes to mind is this book, Religion and National Integration in Africa, Islam, Christianity and Politics in the Sudan and Nigeria. A very interesting book. It talks about, sort of like the environment that incubates sort of like terrorist thinking, extreme thinking, murderous inclinations in the name of Islam and what have you. Also talks about how Christianity was used to essentially create a consumer base in Nigeria. And again, that was part of America's objectives. Whereas Europeans focused on physical occupation, landmass, America looked for markets. And that's I can do another upload about America's trajectory, like Manifest Destiny, its purported objectives for the globe, world order. I'm actually writing a book on New World Orders, actually, that might be out in 2025. But I'm also writing a book about that too and how it relates with the Black experience globally. So do look out for that. I've got a lot coming on. It's been coming up to like 40 odd minutes. So I do really appreciate all of you listening. Some of my statements might have been a bit choppy. Sometimes I trip up over my words. I do like to speak off the cuff. I tend to find that I might have a better engagement with you, the listener, better connection and what have you. What I say resonates. But listen, if you have listened from the 18th minute odd up until now, highly grateful. Honestly, I thank you a lot for listening. Before I forget, please, if you haven't got a copy of my book, Ethnic Escapism and the Blackbird, you can get a copy of my book on diegoife.com. That's diegoife.com. Alternatively, you can type in Ethnic Escapism in the search bar on Amazon, and it's the only book with that name. It will come up. Get you a copy, and I would love to hear your feedback because, I've been flogging copies, and there was one of the students I lecture, right, and man, the feedback she gave me, I got gassed because for 7 years writing this book, I wanted a certain outcome. I can't tell people how to give me, reviews and evaluate my book. But ultimately, you write the book, you do your best, you put your best foot forward, and you basically let the market talk. I'm still gassed. I got this feedback maybe, I think back in December, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe like later December. But man, I'm still running off fumes on that. I'm really, really, really happy about it. And look out, this is volume 1. I've got volume 2 coming out that deals with Africa's black burden. So some of the topic matter I've covered is relevant to it, but it's a different proposition. Trust me, you'll love it. I've also got a book called Lost Boys Redemption that's coming out. I've got another one called, I mentioned it earlier, but I'll say it again, Pirates in Power, Nigeria, Its Perils, Problems and Promise. And I have another book, it's a book about football politics called Football Fame, Fortunes and Foes, A Curious Game of Politics. So there's a lot coming up between now and spring, so to speak. So without further ado, honestly, God bless you. Thank you. Do drop your comments, your likes, all of that lovely stuff. Subscribe if you haven't. And until the next time, peace and much love. Goodbye.